And I went down to France, and the camps in France, these American camps, where you got together to get on the ship, they were named after cigarettes, as I said a while ago. Camp Chesterfield. I was in Camp Chesterfield. A stay of about a week altogether, I think I was in that camp, and I developed something under my feet where I couldn't walk. I had to stay in bed. Hives, they called them. And then finally got on the ship to come back, and I landed in New York. And I went to, where did I go? Camp Kilmer for demobbing. And then you had to go through a process then of getting out of the army. And of course, keep in mind that there were literally millions of Army, Navy, Air Force guys coming back from overseas, Japan and what have you, all looking for work. And I was befriended by a family. I stayed with them and on Staten Island. And I went up to the American Legion. I talked to the commander. He said, I got the right job for you. He said, it just came in yesterday if you want it. I said, okay, what is it? He said, you're going to be the caddy master for the golf course, Silver Lakes, on Staten Island here. I thought, good God, that's wonderful. So I did, and I was in that job for quite a long time. And I met people like Sugar Ray Robinson, Edward G. Robinson, all the people from the entertainment, a lot of people from the entertainment world coming to play golf. And Sugar Ray, he was a strong guy. He said to me, how long do I have to wait? So I took a look. I said, oh, that's going to be about 45 minutes, I said. So he pulled in his pocket. He said, I'm going to give you $100. Get me out. I said, no. I said, I ain't going to do that. Why not? I said, after you leave, I still need a job. And I said, I got a conscience. I said, there's people here before you. I said, I'd love to accommodate you. I said, I think a lot of you, which I did. He was a good boxer. He left, and he said, you keep that anyway. I kept the 100, keep that, keep it. So I worked up there for quite a period of time. I worked in the shipyards on Staten Island, and I wanted then to become a marine engineer. I wanted to go on the tugs in New York, and I couldn't, because when I talked to the vice president, he was talking about my war record. He said, I want to help you, but he said, tell me about your mathematics and your physics and your chemistry. I said, I can't. I said, I haven't finished. I didn't even go to secondary school, high school. He said, Cliff, I can't help you, but I can give you a job on the tugs. I said, no, I said, I think I know what I got to do. Well, sir, it took me 3.5 years at night, after night, after night, summer and winter. I went to Curtis Evening High School and got my high school accredited diploma from New York. I met a lot of good guys there doing that, because when I picked up the subway at by the ferry there, the New York ferry, there were other guys on there. 3 of them were Jewish fellas, and they were a riot. They kept me in stitches, and I became quite good friends with them. I used to go different places with them, met their family. They were, I can't say enough about them. And anyway, once I got my New York accredited high school diploma, I applied to various universities in the United States, and I was accepted by all of them. Northwestern, Purdue, quite a few others, some of them down south. And I went to Purdue University then. And I had taken tests in CCNY, New York, City College, New York, and they pointed to me taking engineering, civil engineering. Well, sir, I tried civil engineering at Purdue University. I was hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. Because I said to myself, if I build a bridge, somebody walks across it, it's going to fall down. Cliffy, get out of it. So I got out of that, and I was talking to a lady by the name of Professor Buckman. She was about 65, 70. A beautiful, beautiful lady in all ways. And I was telling her about not like an engineering. She said, come with me. So I went with her down to her office, and then she started talking about psychology. She said to me, you told me you wanted to help people, and this is your chance. I said, okay, I'm in for it. So I got my baccalaureate degree at Purdue University, and here's this little old boy from Swansea, South Wales, bragging about finishing up in one of their major engineering universities, which I loved. And then I worked on my master's at Northwestern University. My next job was at Pendleton Prison, which is in Indiana. And I remember the time that I was asked if I'd like to join the staff up there. And I had a talk with a friend of mine who happened to be the chief psychologist up there at the time, Bob Harden. And Bob and I became pretty good friends, and he said, I need help. He said, could you come and work for us? I said, yeah, you bet I can. So I started up there, and I must have been with the prison for, I'm guessing now, about 2.5 years, something like that, maybe 3. And because of my background, having worked on the staff at the university after I graduated with my baccalaureate, and before I even started on my master's, which I incidentally didn't complete. I've got most of my work on it. But Bob said to me that he needed somebody that could do the testing for him, because as the chief psychologist there, he not only had Pendleton Prison, but he also had the women's prison in Indianapolis, which eventually he left Pendleton after I'd worked with him for a couple of years, and he then headed up the women's prison in Indianapolis. The kind of work that I did was very interesting, because it involved most of the sophisticated psychological tests like the Rorschach thematic apperception test, Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory test, Markov-Bender. A lot of those tests were given to the prisoners for various reasons. And what I'm leading up to here in a cumbersome way is that Bob Harden then had to report to the parole board, and on the parole board then was the chief psychiatrist for the prisons in Indiana, and the reports that I would write would go to Bob, who would read them, and then of course they would go to the psychiatrist, and this would help to him and the board to decide whether or not they were going to put a particular prisoner on parole or discharge or what have you. And I liked the work because a lot of these prisoners, although they were by definition naughty boys and they were inside, their histories, their lifestyles and everything was to me very, very interesting with my background in clinical psychological work. And I remember one particular chap in particular. He was a young black boy, and he was a great little man, he was. And I shouldn't say little because he was about your size. I mean, he was tall and he was well built, and his IQ wasn't very, very good, but by golly, he could play chess. And I played chess with him when we had an opportunity. And also got to know a lot of the other prisoners, and some of them were in for pretty nasty crimes. My secretary was a guy that, a tall, skinny fellow. He was from down there, I think in the Panhandle, Texas, but I'm not sure, but somewhere down south. And he was brilliant, and he was into fraud. He went in and asked some guy if he could, he liked this particular car and he loved it. Could he take it for a spin around the block to test it? And then he took off to New Orleans with the car. And they got him on that one and they put him inside. And he used to tell me about the different things he used to get into, which I won't elaborate here. He's probably passed on now. But he came to me one time and he said, you know, he said, Cliff, my mother is dying, and she's down there, and I believe it was New Orleans. And he said, I want to see my mom before she dies. I said, yes, I can understand that. I said, you were very close to your mom? He says, very, very close, he said. And I'm so disappointed I let her down by being in prison and being a naughty guy. But I always took care of her. And I would like to go down there to see my mom if it's humanly possible. So I said, leave it with me. And I said, I'll have a talk with the warden. And I said, we'll see what we can do. But I said, now look me in the eye, I said. If this happens, are you going to behave yourself? Are you going to come back? Or are you going to do a run-up? And he said to me, you can bet your life on it, I'll be back. He said, if you can get me to see my mom. And I'll never forget it. Well, I talked to the warden. He let him go down to see his mother, and she did pass away while he was down there. And he did come back, and he was very profuse in his thanks for what I did. He also thanked the warden too. And years later, I was up in Chicago doing a piece of work for the federal government, and I met up with my buddy, Jimmy Tile, who got his doctorate in agronomy, and we were at this very posh restaurant. Jimmy was paying for it, not me, and we were talking there, and some guy came over, and I didn't recognize him for a minute, and he says, Says, "Doc, how are you doing?" So I looked at him and I said, "By God," I said, "I do remember you." He said, "You should. I was your secretary when I was inside." I said, "I would." Yeah, I said, "I can't get over this." He said, "How are you?" So we talked for a spell, and he was in sort of evening dress, you know, and he was he was running this big restaurant, you know, and of course, I think he was still in with the naughty guys, if you want to call it the gang, what have you. And he said to me, he said, "Never forget you," he said. I said, "I know that." I said, "I get a call from you every once in a while from when you were down in Louisiana." He said, "Never forget you and how you helped me with the grieving of my mom." And he said, "Look," he said, "I got to go now," but he said, "Anything you have here tonight is on me." And he said, "And your friend here, Dr. Jimmy Tile," and he said, "I might not get to see you again, but," he said, "if you ever need me, you've got my telephone number," and he said, "I'll take care of the situation." So we, as he was leaving, he said, "Hey," he said, do you want some broads?" I said, "No." I said, "We both married." And I said, "Well, thanks anyway." And he said, "Well, okay." And I did hear from him from time to time after that. So the prison did have some of its rewards. The prison system with the inmates, they've got their own communication system. Cigarettes, of course, is it's not money, but that's the medium of exchange, cigarettes. And like my secretary said when he was inside, "Have you got any cigarettes, Doc?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'll get you some fags." So a packet of cigarettes would get them a pork chop sandwich at night, see, or whatever. So I used to seem okay with cigarettes. And he did a real good job on typing and helping me to correct this and that, because the psychological reports for the psychiatrist and Bob Harden had to be right smack on, and no more than a page. The psychiatrist said, "I don't want any long detailed explanation about the Rorschach or any of the tests." And I said, "Okay." So of course then Bob Harden left, and I was in charge of the services then, the psychological services. And in addition to testing the prisoners, and also if they were mentally disarranged or what, I had to get in on that and go over to the hospital and talk to the doctor, the prison hospital, which was only about 6 or 8 beds, but I used to get involved in that. Or if we had to put a man in isolation, I had to watch that too. So it was an interesting job, and all the officers coming in that were employed to work in the prison, I used to do all the testing on evaluation on that and what have you. So it was quite an interesting job, interesting place to work. And Bob Harden, although he left, we were still the best of friends, and he used to love to sing all those Irish songs, Kathleen Mavourneen, Danny Boy, Irish Eyes Are Smiling. By God, he loved them all. And of course in those days I used to take a drink or two, not too heavy, but I did. And I'd go down to Indianapolis, or he'd come up there to where I was living, and it was a wonderful experience for me. And then of course Bob's sister's boy, who was in the Navy, was swimming in a pond, and he actually broke his neck. So I was involved in his recuperation, and because he was in the Navy bought him all the equipment and the house and everything. They were very good. And I used to play him chess. I had to move the chess pieces because he couldn't. And his faculty was good, but I forget his name now. And Bob's sister. So I got to know the family pretty well. And doing some work in Indianapolis, I had to go over to the United States Finance Department just outside of Indianapolis, and the personnel director, he was interested in the work that I was doing, and he said, "Would you like a job with the government?" Oh, I said, "I'm pretty happy where I am." I said, "I don't know," he said. I said, "What's on offer?" Well, he said, "It's an offer you can't refuse, money-wise, position-wise, and what have you." And then my job then was to, I took the job, and then my job was to first-line supervision, middle management, executive development, and top executive courses, which I used to help design, develop, and implement. And I used to travel doing that kind of work when I worked for the government. I've had quite a number of interesting jobs in my life, and I gained a lot of understanding of people and situations and what have you. And I am very thankful that I switched from engineering into the psychological field. And when I retired, I thought to myself, I'd like to get back to Swansea and get back with my family and so forth. That was on my mind because the saying over in this country is that you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy. And I always wanted to come back. And then there's this thing called, I think it's called E-Right. That deep feeling that you have of belonging, the deep feeling of being Welsh, the deep feeling of wanting to get back to where my boyhood was. And of course my family was still here. And I thought about it, and finally I did that. And of course, I must mention here too that some of it was sad because I divorced my wife. We're still the very best of friends, and she was at my party, my 90th party this September. And she's a good gal, and all my children were here, and people from Virginia and California, Michigan. A couple came in from Australia. It was just a good 90th party. It was tiring, but I certainly, I would go through it again if I had to. It was great. And when I came back, I did work doing psychological work, and also I was a counselor for the Alcohol Drug Advice Center in Swansea. I worked there for years, and that led me up into Cilff Guard a little bit. But also in my thinking, and this goes back over years, I wanted, when I came home, to go up to London and lay a wreath for, out of respect for the courage and determination of my buddies that fell at Omaha Beach and the other 5 campaigns. And the more I thought about it, I thought, I'll do it one of these days. That's when I was 80. So quite recently, as you know, I did through the British Legion, and I've been a member of the British Legion for years. I made arrangements to get a large wreath on it, USA. There were some other things on there. I'm not quite sure what was on there altogether. And I talked to my son-in-law and asked him if he would come with me to do that. So we did it, let's see, a couple of years ago, I think it was. And I stayed with my daughter up in England, and she and her husband took me down then to the where I had to be. A Horse Guard parade is called, and that was an enormous place. And I had to I had to use a wheelchair because I couldn't march the distance to the cenotaph from Horse Guard parade and back because I'm just not up to it physically at my age. And Vinny, my son-in-law, he put on his medals because he's been in the British Army he was there for 7 years, I think, Bosnia and what have you, so he put his medals on. And got to Horse Guard parade, and you have to be in certain places. They direct you, you know, Legion boys here and other people there and what have you. So the when we were sitting there, some guy on a wheelchair pulled up next to me and we shook hands, and we had a nice chat. And he was in the Navy. He was in the British Navy. And, which surprised me, he was off Omaha Beach in a battle wagon, blasting the hell out of the Germans. Those shells going over my head, and we talked about that. He said I should have had a few drop short, and we were kidding about it. And he got wounded. The ship he was on was involved with something with the Germans at sea. And then on the other side, another guy came up in a wheelchair. Because the wheelchairs were together, they put us together so we could get in line to take our wreaths to the cenotaph. And this guy was a desert rat. We got to talking, and he said, "You're on Omaha?" "Yeah," I said. So we talked a little bit about that. I said, "How come they called you rats then?" He said, "Well, we were like pack rats." He said, "We were all over the place killing those doggone crowds out there in the desert." And he said, "That's the name we got anyway, with desert rats." And he said, as you know, he said, it's all about combat, it's all about engagement, and it's trying to get them to get their heads up and fly right. And we talked quite a bit about that. And then another fella pulled it behind me. That was a wheelchair too. And he had a good sense of humor. And he was talking to us, other 3 guys in wheelchairs. And he was in he was in the, to my left on Omaha. He was with the British boys, and he went up there and through Caen, I think he said. And the stories he told us, it just kept us in stitches, this guy. So anyway, it was very bitterly cold it was, and my daughter fortunately had put a heavy thick blanket that I could sit on and wrap around me a little bit. And then we started to march. And of course my family came over for that from the United States. We were in that parade. We weren't the last, but we were almost next to the last. So my family in that cold, and my ex-wife was there, and the rest of my family. And of course Vinny was great with the wheelchair. So we marched by, and of course the American Legion have guys and women at the cenotaph taking your wreath so that you don't slow the parade up, and they lay that wreath then on the cenotaph. Once the wreath had been laid, we moved on, as I said a while ago, and the feelings of that I had, I was quite emotional actually, to be honest with you. Thinking back of the time I was on Omaha Beach and in the Felice Gap, and the guys that got killed, and the tankers, I saw a lot of those tankers get killed. It was one of memories, flashbacks, times when I was at Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania with Trix and the Greek, and then Sergeant Foster, Lieutenant Norwood, the guys in my particular squad and platoon, and thinking of that guy that he was the first guy to get killed when we got on top of Normandy Beach near St. Lo. And with those memories going by, I was back at the Horse Guard parade before I knew it. And it was an accomplishment that I'm glad I did that. And also I contacted the American Legion and explained to them what I did, because I've been with the American Legion for 62 years, and explained then to the managing editor of the British Legion magazine, telling him that the main thrust of me wanting to do this over the years was to, in my way, to thank all those guys that didn't come back, who were in fact the real heroes of the war, not guys like me. We had a job to do, as I say, and that's what we did, and we did it to the best of our ability. There was a lot of killing, and there was a lot of bloodshed, and the thing about it was also, and I must say this, was the thought of being in Germany after the war. That came back very, very strongly. And I finally got back to the, as I said, to the Horse Guard parade, and then finally we really had a good meal and a few drinks. The family's not heavy drinkers, to be honest with you. And then I went back to spend some time with my daughter. Maggie wasn't feeling well, she wasn't there. And my daughter said to me, Dad, she said, would you talk to my kids at school? I said, yeah. She said, well, they do in World War II history. I said, okay, I'll talk to them. She said, that'd be tomorrow. I said, you betcha. And I have never enjoyed myself so much in talking to these young people They were 14, 15, 16, some of them maybe 17, and they were into the study. But the thing about it is they were all special needs children. And they were beautiful, absolutely. I love kids anyway. And one of them said to me, put up his hand, and he said, "Mister, can I ask you a question, please?" I said, "You betcha." He said, "Did you kill Hitler?" I said, "No." I said, "He did that himself." So I told him a little bit about it, and he said, "Thank you very much." And then I kept on talking, and a young lady, she had quite a disability, and she said, "Could I ask you a question, mister?" I said, "Yeah, you betcha." So she said to me, she said, "Did you sink the Bismarck?" I said, "No." I said, "I didn't sink the Bismarck, but I said, I was down in Buenos Aires, Montevideo, about the time that it was down there," and I explained a little bit about that. And then, I'll finish with this. A young boy got up. He said, "I love studying about World War II," he said, "and talking to you." And he said, "I want to thank you on behalf of all my friends here," he said, "for coming to talk to us." And he said, "I have a question." I said, "Okay." He said, "Did they feed you good in the army?" I said, "That's quite a question." He said, "Yes," he said, "because back in those days, in the early parts of the war, 1939, 40, 41, he said, which we were studying, he said, there wasn't much food around." I said, "Yeah," I said, "the Yanks always had plenty of food." And he said, "Did you give gum away?" I said, "Yes, I did." So I really enjoyed that. That really made my trip up to London worthwhile. And also it brought me a little closer to to Vinny, because I couldn't have done it without him, to be honest with you. I'd like to talk about the dedication ceremony I was at several months ago up at Newton. I live in the Mumbles, and I was asked if I would go up there and help in laying the groundwork for the plaque for the American boys that got killed while they were in the Greater Swansea area and South Wales. And it would be the unveiling of the plaque for the boys that got killed and went when they went over to Omaha. When I was up there, well, first of all, the plaque was covered with an American flag. I noticed that when I was going up to the church. But first of all, I met High Lord Lieutenant. We shook hands and we went into church together. We sat in the pew together, and it was a good service. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was very touching because of the emphasis on the American boys that got killed in Omaha and the other campaigns that we went through. The unveiling of the plaque, taking the flag off, was quite a moment for me, holding the American flag and looking at this plaque, which expresses very well the idea that we do remember the boys that were here and got killed in action over in France. After the ceremony, I went in and had a cup of tea, Maggie, and we were sitting next to Brian Lewis, and at the head table, and my wife was next to me, and his wife was next to Maggie, and he was on my left-hand side, and we got talking about different things, and he is a real fine gentleman. I enjoyed meeting him immensely. And he wanted to know about the medals, and I explained those, what they were and so forth. And then he said to me, would you like to go to a party? I said, well, I ain't much of a party fella, but I said, I'm not sure. I said, I'll ask the wife. So I leaned over and I asked Maggie, do you want to go to a party? She said, I don't know, where's it at? I said, I don't know, I said. So I leaned over and I talked to this gentleman. He said, it's at Buckingham Palace. I said, what's that then? He said, it's a garden party. Oh, I said, I've heard of those. So I leaned over and I said to Maggie, it's at Buckingham Palace. She said, let's go and get a dress. No, I'm only kidding. She said, yeah, she said, that would be lovely. We'll go and do that. So we stayed with my daughter up in Kent. And her husband took us down to the palace. And of course you had to have your passport to get in. The security was pretty tight. And we walked quite a ways. It's an enormous place inside, and there was a very large tent going for maybe a mile. It was called the tea tent. Then there was the Queen's tent, and then there was the ambassador's tent. It was well laid out, well thought out. And the Queen and her husband and her family certainly weren't on the scene when we got there. But Maggie and I sat down. I had a cup of Java. I like my coffee. And when we were sitting there, some fella came over and he said, you're an interesting looking man, he said. Tell me something about yourself. So I explained to him about my being in the British Merchant Marine when I was 15, all that involved there. Then I explained to him about getting into the Yankee Army, and he perked up his ears, and I said, yeah, I was on Omaha. So we talked about that, and he said, I'll see you later. So he took off. So he did come back, and he said, Cilff Guard? I said, yeah. He said, come with me, sir. The Queen wants to talk with you. The Queen wants to have a talk with you, right? So I said, okay. So Maggie and I went over, and she was in a very large area, and there must have been a large number of people on both sides of her, but the area she was at, she was isolated pretty much. Good security. And this gentleman said to me, stand right here now, and the Queen will talk to you in a moment. So we stood there, and he went off, he came back, and he said, the Queen wants to talk to you now. So we were moved up. There was 4 couples, I think, to see the Queen. Anyway, when she came over, I introduced her to my wife, and they had a nice talk. And Maggie said to the Queen, I remember when you were a young princess up in London in World War II driving the ambulances. And the Queen smiled, and she got a little closer, and she said to Maggie, fancy you remembering that now. And the Queen had a big smile on her face, and she came over to me and she said, I understand you were on Omaha. I said, yes, ma'am. I said, I was up on the top of Omaha, and at the Battle of Bulge I was wounded. And we talked a little bit about that. And I said to the Queen, I said, ma'am, I said, I'm having a little problem picking you up with my hearing. I said, it ain't too good at my age. I said, I'm almost 90. And she leaned forward and she had a smile, and she said, I have that problem too, she said. And she is such a wonderful, And I'm not saying this because she's the queen. I'm saying this because she is the kind of person that puts you at ease, can have a nice little chat, and it's something that I think she knows that we'll always remember. And then she shook hands, and Maggie and I took off, and we sat down at the table, and a fella came over, and these men are immaculately dressed in morning dress, and they're usually ex-generals or what have you. They've had a military career. Anyway, this fella said, Cilff Guard? I said, yes, sir. He said, Prince Edward would like to have a talk with you. I said, okay. He said, can you leave now? I said, yeah, I'll get another cup of java after. So Maggie and I went over to talk to Prince Edward. And what a thorough delight it was talking to this young man. Immediately you can tell physically he's fit. And in his cravat he had a little diamond like that, which wasn't so little actually. And I noticed that in his cravat. And he started out by saying, I understand that you were at Omaha and the Felice Gap and what have you. I said, yeah, that's where we met up with the British boys. And we talked, I'm guessing now, for 15, 20 minutes. I think we talked with the Queen for about 10 minutes. And after we talked to him, then we went to sit down, Maggie and I finally enjoyed my cup of coffee. I'd seen the Queen, I'd seen part of her family. And for an old boy coming from the very low socioeconomic ladder in Swansea to having had an opportunity to talk to such a wonderful lady as the Queen of this country and her son. And that's going to stay with me for a long time. I want to let you know too that I'm going to lay a wreath down on the cenotaph here in Mumbles, and I also would like, for the record, for people to understand that I'm very active selling poppies. I've done it for years down at the market in Swansea, and I've met so many people that buy a poppy and they remember me and the rest of the guys down there year after year. Talking about laying wreaths, this particular wreath laying in November of this year will have a rather significant meaning for me, because I'm 90 years of age now, and although I have a contract with the gentleman upstairs for the next 5 years, this could very well be the last time that I am going to do this. And the feeling I get when I'm doing this is one of deep sorrow, really, for the guys, British, Canadian, American, who fell up there on French soil. And it will always be in my mind, this thing. It never leaves you, ever. The enormity, the whole thing has had a tremendous impact on my life. But it's only within recent years that I got my medals. I was 80 and I did this, and I would like other children to know that although I did this for my children, in some way it's going to help other children out there and possibly adults to realize what guys like myself did to help the democratic process to continue from a situation that was pretty nasty with the Germans, the way they were in the last war.